Hello there, welcome to another episode of Matt's Chats. This is a series of videos where we talk to people in and around the whisky industry to find out a little bit more about it and bring it to life. And I'm here today at Berry Brothers and Rudd for the launch of Tobermory 25. And I'm delighted to be joined for this little chat with Gordon Buchanan. And he is the renowned wildlife filmmaker and photographer. So thank you, Gordon. The reason you're here is because there's a collaboration between yourself and Tobermory Distillery. So can you just sort of tell me a little bit about that collaboration and what it means to you?
Yeah, well, initially, the distillery, obviously, they knew that I grew up on Mull. I go back quite often, so they've probably seen me on the main street. So we started a conversation about, a possible collaboration and what that could look like. And the first question they asked, other than being from Tobermory, is does the distillery have any relevance in my life? And it does in lots of ways. During the period when it was closed, when I was a kid, it seemed to be closed. It was closed for a lot of my childhood, and I think at one point, I was really young. I didn't even know what it was, what that building was. It was called the distillery, but I didn't know what a distillery was because it wasn't producing anything. And we'd often walk past, so there's the still house, there's a big windows at the front, and when it was closed, these windows were just covered in dust and grime. And I used to look through the window and into the still room and just marvel at all of this apparatus, not knowing really what it was for. And eventually, when we were about 12, we found a way into the distillery through.
Was this when it was closed still?
This is when it was closed, and it became a sort of unofficial youth club for the youth, the kids of Tobermory. We spent a big period of our lives sort of on a rainy winter evening, instead of hanging about the streets, inside the distillery. So I do know it inside and out. And when it reopened, my mum, who'd done a lot of sort of jobs locally, kind of just here, there and everywhere, she worked changing rooms for a guest house. She worked in the fish and chip shop, she worked in the hydroboard shop, but sort of in 1990 she got what I thought was like a proper job, and she was the assistant manager, became the assistant manager at the distillery. So my mum worked there and was sort of present for the first sort of filling of the first casks after a long period of closure. And then a year after she started, my stepfather, who wasn't my stepfather at the time, he became the manager. So my mum and stepdad met and they got married, and 30 years later.
And they met because of the distillery?
They met over process of making Tobermory whiskey, and then they both left the island, carried on working in whiskey, and then my brother, he got a job as a stillman in the distillery, so he was there for a long period of time, just overseeing just general maintenance, so all of the kind of the boilers, the pumps, the valves, pretty much everything from the grain coming in to the raw spirit going out. So the whiskies that we tasted today, it was like all of them were produced when my brother was
during his tenure.
Which was really neat. I confirmed it with him. I was like, when were you there? And I was like, did the maths. I was like, yeah, all of these whiskies.
That's amazing to think, isn't it? That this Tobermory 25, he was there.
I know,
to produce it, and now with quarter of a century later.
That feels a long time.
So how did I know it does, doesn't it? But how did the collaboration sort of come about? They approached you, did they? And what does it look like going forward?
I think it's about trying to create a bridge from the distillery to the wider community, but to the island as well. So I think the distillery is a big important part of the town, but I think my job as the island ambassador is to be this sort of bridge to help sort of celebrate and protect and preserve sort of natural habitats on Mull, but also the kind of promotion of what Mull can produce. And it's an incredible place, and I have a huge amount of pride to be from there, but the products that come from Mull. So when I sort of see a bottle of Leitchuk or a bottle of Tobermory whiskey on a shelf, I don't always go, by the way, that's I'm from that island, or like Mull cheddar, sort of Island Bakery biscuits. Sort of, it's got, produces these high quality.
Island Mull cheddar is delicious.
Yeah, and it just it for a little island, it doesn't feel little when you're there, but it produces some amazing things, and it gives people an amazing experience. So I think the Island Ambassador is just that sort of a celebration of that very special place, so people can enjoy and appreciate the island itself, but enjoy and appreciate the things that the island produces.
And I think you've kind of alluded to this question, but I just wanted to talk a bit about your personal whiskey journey.
Mm-hmm.
You obviously started, in your youth when you were sort of getting into the distillery when it was closed. But how has that sort of developed? And do you take whiskey on your trips when you're travelling around the world?
It's funny because whiskey, when I was a kid, being in a sort of fishing village and sort of knowing fishermen, we would get, you go home from school and there'd be a massive bag of scallops on the doorstep from a fisherman, or a big basket of prawns. So these were like they were not cheap food, that was free food for us. So things like scallop, West Coast langoustines, they're luxury items, but I ate them for free. So I always have a slight problem with going to a restaurant. It's like, you give me 3 scallops, I'd have 10 of them for a sort of lunchtime snack. And when it comes to whiskey, because my stepfather John, worked in the industry, my brother still does, and John worked at the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, so he had lots and lots of whiskey. So whiskey was free for me for years and years. So it's one of those things. I didn't drink it was free, but I drank it because I really love whiskey. And when it comes to travelling with something to make life a little easier, I think in my line of work, often you're in very uncomfortable predicaments or situations or locations, and I'm all about just trying
and
to.
You have to be strict with what you're taking, of course, with your camera gear and sort of everything else that you're doing. So, you take whiskey with you?
Yeah, I take whiskey with me on every trip, because it is it's sort of the best bang for your buck, or best bang for the per gram, because some people sort of say, I'll take a bottle of wine, as that's not going to last very long, but you can take a bottle of whiskey away, and that'll sort of last you a week to have a dram each night and to share it. So I think it's that sort of a Scottish pride as well. It's kind of, I always think it's a bit schmaltzy when you say that, but I think kind of having whiskey is an international drink that is enjoyed around the world, and I kind of like taking it with me and having that as part of a part of me. And at the end of the day, you're making wildlife documentaries. You have to put in the hours. You could be sitting waiting for days and days. You could be schlepping with heavy backpacks for mile after mile. So at that end of the day, just that, to have that sort of punctuation mark that this is the end of the day, and it's not when the sun sets, it's when I get out my bottle of whiskey, and I've got these tiny little kind of travel cups that I take, and everybody has a dram, and it's such a nice way to sort of bring people together, and sort of just a gear shift, so it works over. This is time for us to just sort of enjoy each other's company and enjoy the whiskey. What
would you say is the strangest place that you've had a nip of whiskey?
I was working in Papua New Guinea, and I was having to carry all of my own equipment, so it's sort of this massive backpack. So the camera itself and all the batteries, that takes up most of the weight. But I wasn't going to go off on this sort of 2.5 week expedition without some whiskey, so I thought I'll take two bottles. And we went from staying in a village in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, and then we went to some tiny little kind of sort of area of forest. We were in hammocks, and then we walked another few days, and we ended up, I was in a bat cave. I thought, instead of putting up tents, I'll just sleep in this bat cave. So at the end of the day, in a cave, in a hammock, surrounded by bats, I had a couple of drams at the end of the day in the hammock. So I think, a cave filled with bats. I might not be the only one, but it was one of the most unusual.
And what did you excuse me, got a bit of a cough, but what did you think of the Tobermory 25?
Do you know, I tried this for the first time last week, and when I took a sip today, I was like, it just seemed different. It was almost, I think, like my sort of palate wasn't I didn't know what to expect from it, and I don't know whether because it was sort of it's the oldest whiskey we were tasting today, but I really enjoyed it so much more the second time round. I loved it the first time round, but second time round I was like, that's a very, very drinkable whiskey. There's just sort of lots of, when it comes to whiskey, I like really heavily peated whiskies, but something like that, there's sort of the very sweet kind of...
Is that a sort of island man in you?
Yeah, I think so. I think I always sort of gravitate towards sort of quite heavily peated whiskies, but then more... with this 25-year-old, I like there's a kind of sort of burnt honeycomb sweetness to it that I like. So I like the range, that sort of, you've got heavy kind of peated whiskies at one end, but then something that's got more kind of sweeter notes and just feels very different,
Yeah, it's got a lovely richness and sweetness, hasn't it? And sort of, someone said it, and then I can't get it out of my head now, but this sort of quite oily quality.
Yeah.
And just absolutely delicious, I thought. So
I always find when people suggest something, you smell a whiskey and you're getting sort of lots of different smells, but when somebody says the word that actually is relevant to that whiskey, so
it's the power of suggestion.
Yeah, it's like so coconut, and you're like, there's those coconutty sort of smells to it, but there's some, I don't know if in the summertime in Scotland you get the gorse bushes kind of burst into flower, and those yellow flowers are really, really pungent. On a hot day and you walk through a sort of an area where there's lots of gorse, and the air's just filled with this really kind of coconutty aroma, and that sort of is quite, sort of reminds me of that. It's kind of sweet coconutty, but then there's sort of there's a kind of Scottishness to it as well. So no, I love it. It's a very delicious whiskey, and so that my brother was probably twiddling his thumbs as that sort of passed through the stills.
That's quite mind-blowing, actually.
25 years ago.
When you said that earlier, that's like really sort of impressive in a way, isn't it? It just shows that there's a longevity to the whiskey industry. You've got to take your time with these things. A bit like, I guess, when you're out, you say you've got to wait days upon days, maybe for this one thing to happen that you're waiting to film. Yeah. So there's a synergy there, isn't there?
No, I mean, it's like, my brother helped produce this 25 years ago, and we've opened the bottle and we can drink it quarter of a century later.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you for
speak to you.
Taking these few minutes to chat with me, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.